Hello. I'm going to do this video solely for myself. And if it's of any value to anyone else, wonderful. Today is, it's now the early hours of February 3rd, 2026. I would like to smile, but my face feels a bit heavy. February 3rd, 2026. Here in the States, it has been quite a year, but more obviously, it's been quite a few weeks. It's been quite a month or so. I don't want to get too much into the weeds. How much do I want to say? Let me stop and think for a second. Took a moment to consider what I want to say and where I want to take this. And an interesting thought about it that came to mind was it's not going into the weeds of this that is really what matters to this conversation, to where I want to take it, and at the same time, I don't want to beat around the bush. There's been a lot of political pain and social pain in the States, and there's been a lot of divisiveness and a lot of there's been a lot of divisive rhetoric, and a lot of people seem to be waking up. A lot of people seem to be getting tired of things, and a lot of civilians have been hurt or unlawfully or unfairly treated. And that's not to say that no one else on some other side might not have received that also. But people, civilians, have rights, and they have a right to speak up, and they have a right to protest, and they have a right to tell the government, we don't approve of this. The way you're doing things is not right and is not okay, and we see it, and we're not going to just step down and step away because the narrative you're telling is that that's what we should do, and otherwise we're causing problems according to your narrative. So that's all I'm going to say on that for now. My greater point, I'm just tired of the lies. This was not my point, but so many lies, and it's like you can see them if you just if you have experience around a manipulator, an abuser, a liar, once you see it for what it is, once you catch it for what it is, you see through it, and you get tired of hearing anything they had to say or any of their spin, because you just like intuitively understand what it is, and you understand how they function. You understand how they deny. A great term I learned from Gooby and Dooby YouTube channel, Darvo. And I knew these tactics, but I'd never heard it laid out in this acronym: deny, attack, reverse, victim, and offender. So you get tired of it, then you get tired of the back and forth in the tribal, the political or religious tribal sphere, tribalistic approach in the religious or political sphere. And it's like, at a point, it's like, this is not about identities. This is not about belonging to one camp or another. Because when it comes to being a seeker, if you're seeking truth, if you're committed to truth, then you can't be committed to one label or another, one party or another, one anything or another. Your commitment is to truth, and that's it. And you don't get to decide what truth is and then commit to it. You don't get to draw conclusions about truth and then commit to those conclusions. That's not truth. Those are conclusions. Those are assumptions. Those are preconceived beliefs. But when you can see people or entities, agencies, departments outright lying, and you can, and people can have suspicion about it, about what they're claiming, and then evidence comes out that directly contradicts the stories they're telling, at some point it's like, why is anyone defending this anymore? It's not a matter of them, but they did this too, blah, blah, blah type of stuff. They did this thing. It's like, just take accountability. Just acknowledge what's happening. Don't defend people who are lying, especially when they're hurting people and then defaming them to protect themselves. This is just a human thing. This is not political or religious. This is just a human thing. And it's crazy because Jesus would not approve. All these people get brought into this. People that claim Jesus, but like defend these things, defend people that are doing these things, or go, well, deflect and finger point to other people. It's like, Jesus doesn't approve of that. Jesus does not like hypocrisy, especially from those who have some power, especially from those who claim to belong to God. So 10 minutes is a good time. 10 minutes is a good time to segue. So all of that is what it is. And I've been thinking of authorities of the law, or Pharisees, whatever he says exactly there. You strain out a gnat and swallow a camel. I was thinking about that line earlier, and I was going to speak on it, do a video to speak on it. Truth is, I kind of feel sad. Some noise in the background. Hopefully that's not a problem. I see people upset, and some of it's warranted. I see people calling out other people, and some of it's warranted. Some of it is very warranted. I think some of the religious in our society are very warranted to be called out at this point. Think of the line, "These people worship me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." And I know people will say, well, is this political? Don't make it political. Some people make their religion very political. They make their Christianity very political. They think that because of their Christianity, they have to take a particular political stance, and they wrap themselves around in it. And then there's people that will come on in response if you call that out, and will be like, well, don't make it political. And that's fine. I would generally agree with that. But when politics has weaponized religion, when politics has taken religion, has taken Jesus, as well as other religions, but here in particular, we're talking about in America right now, when it takes religion, tries to marry it in a way to usurp power and to claim a monopoly of ownership on that religion. And that's no good. That's no good. Jesus speaks against such things. When you do that and then cause oppression, Jesus speaks against such things. Let's not forget that the prophets in the Old Testament, as well as Jesus, called out leaders, both religious and political when necessary, not for political intent, but because of their actions towards human beings, because of oppression towards human beings, because of wrongdoing towards human beings, because of, I think that sums it up well enough. So with all this, what I was getting at is, you know, generally I think that we should be peaceful and we should be kind towards one another. I don't need someone to tell me this to feel this way, but I often quote Jesus or scripture for the sake of this, often because people, when I speak in religious circles, when I speak to people who consider themselves Christian, it often seems like they need scriptural backing. Some people are like, well, unless it's biblical, I'm not going to believe it. And so it's like it doesn't even really matter if the biblical passage makes sense or not. It's like it's still needed for them, for what you're saying to pass some gatekeeping thing in their mind. I don't know other people, it's helpful for them. It helps them connect, like, oh, okay, I get what you're saying. It adds some credibility to it. And that's fine, but at the end of the day, you shouldn't need to quote scripture for the truth to be heard. So generally, I believe we should treat each other with kindness. We should treat each other with kindness and compassion and understanding and love. And it just so happens that aligns with what Jesus conveys. And Jesus conveys that is what the prophets before him convey. To me, this suggests that the authority they're speaking from to say that does not come from Scripture itself. It doesn't inherently come from Scripture. It comes from here. It comes from something experiential. It comes from intuitive knowing. It comes from intuitive knowing or from experience of life, observation, feeling, knowing, all these things, from knowing life and understanding these things. People get so focused on the book, so focused on rules in all religions, that they get disconnected from life itself, from the reality itself. And that's the difference between mystics, whether you're talking about prophets from the past, wise men or sages, or Jesus, or mystics of the present or of the last 2,000 years. Just speaking about in Christianity, not to mention in other traditions. That's the difference between mystics and, I don't know. That's the difference between mystics and the people that Jesus points out criticism towards about, I'm trying to use the exact term he uses. Scholars of the law, scribes. So with all of this, guess I'm hitting on different points as I'm going down these roads. It's just painful how complicated things get. It's like children understand. No, I'm not saying all children are like this or all children are good or behave well or whatever. But children understand these basic things of like, just don't be mean. Don't be mean to people. Don't be prejudiced towards people. Like, just don't be like that. Like, you talk to kids, decent kids, they get this stuff. You don't really have to tell them. Don't be mean. Don't be hateful. Don't be prejudiced. Don't be bigoted. Don't be racist. Don't be sexist. Don't be, like, it's not complicated. Treat others the way you want to be treated. All people. All people. Not complicated. Not, well, it's loving for me to do this to them because I believe this thing over here, because I have this thing that I'm supposed to believe, all this mental gymnastics. Just be good to people. Just be decent to people. Again, you see this mental gymnastics in religion, but it's Jesus himself like lays it out as like, do not judge and you will not be judged. Do not condemn, you will not be condemned. Forgive and you will be forgiven. For whatever measure, by whatever measure you measure to another, you will be measured to. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is the law and the prophets. That's what he says. According to Scripture. There's translations that actually put it as, this is the sum of the law and the prophets, which is a fair translation. But the actual literal translation, as far as I know from looking at it, is actually just, this is the law and prophets. This is the law and the prophets. Meaning the Torah, or the books, the Jewish scriptures before the time of Jesus. And if that's not enough, somewhere else they have the discussion, depending on which book, which translation you take. What's the most important commandment? Love God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your might, or with all your soul, or with all your life. It's probably a more accurate translation. All your essence, something along those words. All your mind, all your strength, depending on the translation you take, depending on which book you're looking at. And, he says, and love your neighbor as yourself. In one of those books he says, and the second is like unto it. In another book he says something along the lines of, and the second he doesn't quite say it. I don't think he quite says, and the second is as important. But in one of the translations he says something close to that. And then he goes, again, depending on which book, which gospel, depending on which gospel, he says, upon these two commandments hangs all of the law and the prophets. Love God, love your neighbor as yourself. This doesn't mean force some belief in God so that you love God. It doesn't mean force other people to believe in God so that you can enforce them to love God. No, no, no. That's not what it says. That is not what it's saying. It's saying you just love God. If you are a believer, whatever that means exactly, love God with all you have and love your neighbor as yourself. Because loving your neighbor as yourself, because loving your neighbor is loving God. But what about the people that we think have a different God than us? What about the people that also claim to worship God, but we don't agree that that God is the same as the God that we have, even though we're both referring to a universal God? Do I go to war with them? No. Just love God and love your neighbor as yourself. You don't have to understand God. You don't need to draw conclusions about God. Everyone's experience of the divine is somewhat different, even people within denominations, because everyone has their own subjective experience. And people might come together and say, well, we believe the same things. Let's lay out these things that we believe about God. All right, let's all agree. Let's all concur. We believe these things. Because if we don't, then, well, we're under threat of being kicked out of this denomination or whatnot. So misses the point. So misses the point again and again. The message is like, just love one another. Love your neighbor. Love God. You know of God? Great. Love God. And love your neighbor. I wasn't planning to go so much on this point, but it's the whole of what I am and have. So, yeah. There's other places in the New Testament where this is repeated. Times people get so focused on the love God part, like, well, that's the most important part. They treat like love your neighbor as a secondary thing. Like, well, you can't love your neighbor unless you love God. No, it does not say that. You, it doesn't say that. It doesn't say that. So if we're talking about biblical stuff, and I'm not someone that feels that something can only be true if it's in the Bible, but the people that kind of make those claims, it's like the claim you're making isn't in the Bible. It's not biblical. There's actually only, if I recall, it's only in that passage, again, that story is in, I think, 3 of the Gospels, and it's told slightly different in each one. In one of them, it's a lawyer that is asking Jesus what's the most important line. Jesus turns it back to him, and the lawyer answers. Maybe they're different stories, um, but it's actually only there where loving your neighbor and loving God are like qualified together. Elsewhere, Jesus just says, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. He says, you have heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemy. I say, love your enemy also. Do good to those who persecute you? I don't recall exactly. I remember the overall passage. I just don't remember. Yeah. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who no. Bless those who curse. Yeah. Yeah. Bless those who curse you, or pray for those who curse you. Bless those who curse you. Pray for those who spitefully use you. I'm being so particular because I take the details, I take responsibility with getting the details correct. So, again, elsewhere, this sentiment is repeated. Elsewhere in the New Testament, after the Gospels, it goes on to say, love is the fulfillment of the law. That's in Romans. Another place it says, if you were truly fulfilling the royal law, it calls it in Scripture, of love your neighbor, then you are doing very well. It echoes these sentiments more than once. So it's just wild to me that we get so focused on, that we lose sight of that with who's wrong and who we think is wrong and it's sinful and whatnot. And it's like, oh my gosh, just love them. No, you don't need to rebuke them all the time for something that you don't understand or like or whatever. Just love them. Just be compassionate. Are they actively hurting you or anyone else? Just love them. Let them live the lives they're living. Love them. Like, there's a difference between being like, I disagree with what they're doing because of the interpretation of the beliefs I think I'm supposed to have and the fear that that causes me. There's difference between that and being like, okay, there's actual harm happening here and I guess I need to intervene. Anyways, I don't want to get too into that. Enough. I'm tiring my mind out. But the point I wanted to get to all of this was there's been some very legitimate call outs. Jesus himself also calls people out. Not that I think we should always use Jesus or what we perceive Jesus does as justification for how we act. But Jesus pretty clearly is willing to rebuke, willing to call out things like hypocrisy, oppression, things like that. then I think about the things that cause people to do the things they do and act the way they do, and even think the way they do, or to express themselves the way they do. The things that we don't often consciously realize, whether it's traumatic history, whether it's deep-seated fears that they haven't been able to confront and work through, whether it's influences beyond their control, whether it's mental or cognitive things that are affecting them. When I think about this, even about like the people that we might seem to be like the worst people, and I think about how the worst people, the people who do the worst things, just truly terrible things, and don't bring them to the light, keep them in the darkness. I know. We all do things. We all make mistakes, at least most of us. But I think about the people that just do like these terrible things, and it's kept in the dark and it's covered up. And I think about there comes a time when they just become sad people. They just become sad old people with a terrible, treacherous past. And due to that, they get so much, I don't want to say hatred, but I want a better word than that. But yeah, they get so much vehement dislike, and then they just become sad old people with a terrible past. And at that point, it is really sad. It is really sad. I know some people would go, don't feel for them. They made their choices and things and all that. Feel for the rest of us. Feel for those that they've hurt. And that's accurate. It's not that you shouldn't feel for the people that were hurt and damaged. But again, it's like we lose sight of why people are the way they are, even who are terrible. And that's not making excuses for them. Not making excuses for like abusers rather than for victims. Of course, the victims deserve all of the compassion, all the help we can give them. It's just sad. All the way around, it's just sad. Trying to smile. I'm putting a smile on my face if it's not obvious. It's like some people just spin the world into chaos and mess just to end up sad. They generate all this malcontent towards themselves, create all this division, anger, fights, destruction, just to end up sad in the end, old and sad. So, what am I trying to get to here? I guess I've said what I've been trying to get to. Everything I've said has been what I've been trying to get to. I guess it's a tricky thing to both be loving, love your neighbor as yourself. That includes your enemies. I didn't even talk about the story of the Good Samaritan. I'd planned to talk about that earlier in all of this, but that's okay. To be loving, to love your neighbor, to love your enemies, yet to also be able to call out injustice, persecution, horrid acts, to be able to call it out, call out the hypocrisy, the persecution, all that stuff. As Jesus did, as prophets did, as, people across the world have done. And also, in the midst of all that, to also hold space to recognize all the things we don't usually see about why people act the way they do, cause the problem they do. It's a tricky thing. It's a tricky thing. Because it's like, in being loving and kind and loving everyone, including the worst, you don't want to just become complicit and roll over and not speak out when you have a chance, not do something when you have a chance for your fellow neighbors who are being hurt, oppressed, victimized. And in the act of doing that, you don't want to become like hateful towards the people you're speaking out against. So you've got to speak up, and sometimes you've got to be really quite clear. Jesus was he didn't hold back at times. Sometimes he was pretty harsh, pretty critical. He just spoke what he felt needed to be said and didn't really censor it. It didn't seem like, I suspect he probably did to some degree, but and then with that, to be able to also come back around to being like, okay, and at the same time, this person has issues that aren't even obvious to me. Like, how do I reconcile all of that? I think the answer is to just take that all, swallow it, digest it, and do the best you can. Not worry too much about hitting it perfectly. should end this.